A man comes running to the doctor, shouting in pain. "Doctor, you've got to help me. I was stung by a bee." "Don't worry," says the doctor. "I'll put some cream on it." "You'll never find that bee," the man replies. "It must be miles away by now." "No," the doctor sighs. I'll put cream where you were stung." "Oh, it happened in my garden," the man says. "Not what I meant," the doctor snaps, growing frustrated. "Which part of your body did the bee sting?" "My finger," the man shouts. "It stung my finger and it really hurts." "Which finger?" the doctor asks. "How should I know? All the bees look the same to me." Two doctors, Dean and Gable, were treating a man with severe lung disease. They explained that his habit of smoking weed had worsened his condition. "But it's just herbal," the man protested. "How can it be bad for me?" Dr. Dean sighed. "Nature isn't always innocent. Apricot stones contain cyanide. Some mushrooms are deadly. I even have a plant in my garden. Sit under it for 5 minutes and you'll die. Just because it's natural doesn't mean it's safe." The patient nodded, finally convinced, and promised to quit smoking before leaving. As the doctor sat down to lunch, Dr. Gable asked, "By the way, what plant do you have that kills you in 5 minutes?" "A water lily," Dr. Dean replied with a smirk. It's Soviet Russia, 1978. Rabinovich is startled awake by a loud knock at his door in the middle of the night. Rabinovich: "Who's there?" Firm voice: "Post office." Open the door. Sighing, Rabinovich opens it to find 2 KGB agents standing there, one holding an envelope. Agent 1: "Comrade Rabinovich, tell us, what is the best system of government in the world?" Rabinovich: "Communism, of course." Agent 2: "And which country has the highest living standards?" Rabinovich: "The Soviet Union, naturally." Agent 1: "And which constitution best protects the rights of its citizens?" Rabinovich: "The Soviet Constitution, without a doubt." Agent 2 narrows his eyes. "Then why, Comrade Rabinovich, have you filed a request to emigrate to France?" Rabinovich shrugs. "Because over there, comrades, the post office doesn't deliver at 3 a.m. A Chinese man visits Los Angeles for a holiday. After landing at LAX, he hails a cab to his hotel. On the way, he notices some buses and remarks to the driver, "The buses here are so noisy and slow. In China, buses are much faster." The taxi driver says nothing. A bit later, they pass by a marina with boats in the water. The tourist comments again, "The boats here are so slow. In China, our boats are way faster." The driver remains silent, still focused on driving. When they finally arrive at the hotel, the tourist steps out and asks for the fare. The driver tells him the amount, and the man is shocked. "What? Your buses are slow, your boats are slow. How come your taxi meter is so fast?" The driver smiles and replies, "It's made in China." A man lies in a hospital bed, awaiting a groundbreaking brain transplant. The doctor enters with a smile. "Good news! You're eligible for the transplant," the doctor says. "But since this is a new procedure, your insurance won't cover the full cost. We'll give you 3 options for the brain donor, and you can choose based on your budget." The man nods. "All right, let's hear them." The doctor begins. "First, we have engineer brains at $100 an ounce. Then, astrophysicist brains at $200 an ounce. Finally, politician brains. Those are the priciest at $1,000 an ounce." The man's jaw drops. $1,000 an ounce for politician brains? Why so expensive?" The doctor chuckles. "Do you have any idea how many politicians it takes to gather an ounce of brain?" A Texan visiting London hops into a taxi for a sightseeing tour. As they pass Big Ben, the driver points out, "This iconic clock tower took 15 years to complete." The Texan scoffs. 15 years. Back in Texas, we'd build something twice as tall in half the time. They continue to Tower Bridge. The driver proudly mentions this masterpiece was finished in just 8 years. The Texan laughs. 8 years? That's nothing. In Texas, we'd build a bridge 10 times bigger in less than 2. Finally, they pass Buckingham Palace. The Texan points at it and asks, "What's that building over there?" "Must have taken you Brits a century to build it." The taxi driver shrugs and replies, "No idea, mate. Wasn't there yesterday." A man walks into an antique shop and spots an exquisite bronze statue of a Siamese cat. He asks the shopkeeper, "How much for the cat?" The shopkeeper replies, "The statue is $200, but the story that comes with it is $2,000. The man says, "I don't care about the story. I'll just take the statue." As he's paying, the shopkeeper smiles knowingly. "All right, but you'll be back for the story?" The man leaves the shop, carrying the statue, and heads down the street. At the first crosswalk, he glances behind him and notices 3 or 4 cats following him. Puzzled, he keeps walking. By the next block, he turns around again. Now there are 30 cats trailing him. Feeling uneasy, he picks up his pace. Soon, the man looks back and sees hundreds of cats chasing him. Panicked, he starts running, the cats growing in number with every step. Finally, he reaches the pier at the end of the street, turns around, and sees thousands of cats swarming toward him. Desperate, he hurls the statue into the water. To his astonishment, every single cat dives in after the statue and disappears beneath the waves. Breathless, the man sprints back to the shop, bursts through the door, and gasps, "I need to know, do you have a statue of a politician?" Many years ago, an old sculptor was finally permitted to leave the Soviet Union and emigrate to the United States, where his son lived. At the Moscow airport, a customs official searching his luggage found a bust of Lenin. Customs officer, "What is that?" Old man, "What is that? What is that? Do not say, 'What is that?' Say, 'Who is that?' That is Lenin, the genius who built this workers' paradise." The official, satisfied, smiled and let him through. Upon arrival at JFK Airport, an American customs officer also found the bust. Customs officer, "What is that?" Old man, "What is that? What is that?" Do not say, "What is that?" Say, "Who is that?" That is Lenin, the bastard. I'll display him in my toilet for all the years he made my life miserable. The American officer chuckled and let him pass. Finally, the old man reached his family's home in Brooklyn. While unpacking, his grandson pointed to the bust and asked, "Grandpa, who is that?" The old man grinned and said, "Who is that? Who is that? Don't say, 'Who is that?' Say, 'What is that?' That, my boy, is 8 pounds of gold." A few decades ago, an American, a Russian, and an Australian were having dinner together, boasting about their nation's advancements. The American proudly said, "We are so advanced. We've built airplanes that can reach outer space." The other two asked, "What? Outer space?" The American replied, "Well, not exactly, but just a few inches below." After a moment, the Russian chimed in, "That's nothing. We've built submarines that touch the seabed." The other two asked, "What? The actual seabed?" The Russian admitted, "Well, not exactly, just a few inches above." Then the Australian grinned and said, "Well, we've been advanced for centuries. For instance, we can pee with our belly buttons." The other two were shocked. "What, belly buttons?" The Australian shrugged. "Well, not exactly, just a few inches lower." Once there was a cruel king who delighted in executing anyone who displeased him. One day, a minister gave him some bad advice, and the king, enraged, ordered the minister to be thrown to his pack of ravenous guard dogs. The minister pleaded, "Your Majesty, I have served you faithfully for 10 years, and for one mistake you do this." The king, unmoved, dismissed him with a wave, but the minister fell to his knees. "Please grant me 10 days before my execution." Curious but confident in his decision, the king agreed. In those 10 days, the minister approached the keeper of the dogs and offered to take over their care. He fed them, groomed them, and showered them with affection. The once feral beasts grew gentle and loyal under his care. When the day of his execution came, the minister was thrown into the cage. But instead of attacking, the dogs wagged their tails, licked his hands, and played with him as if he were an old friend. The king was stunned. "What has happened to my vicious dogs?" The minister calmly replied, "I cared for them for only 10 days, and they did not forget my kindness. Yet I served you loyally for 10 years, and you forgot it at my first mistake." The king paused, realizing his error. The next day he replaced the dogs with crocodiles. In the year 2032, Sarah Goldstein made history as the first woman and the first Jewish president of the United States. A few weeks after the election, she called her mother. "So, Mom, I assume you'll be coming to my inauguration?" Sarah asked. Her mother hesitated. "I don't think so. It's a 10-hour drive. Your father isn't as young as he used to be, and my arthritis is acting up again." "Don't worry about it, Mom. I'll send Air Force One to pick you up and bring you home. A limousine will be waiting at your door." "I don't know, sweetheart. Everyone will be so fancy schmancy. What on earth would I wear?" Sarah smiled. "I'll make sure you have a beautiful gown, custom made by the best designer in New York." Mom sighed. "But honey, you know I can't eat all those rich foods you and your friends like." "Mom, I promise the whole affair will be handled by the best kosher caterer in New York. Everything will be perfect." Reluctantly, her mother agreed to come. On January 20th, Sarah Goldstein was sworn in as President of the United States. In the front row, Sarah's mother sat proudly. She leaned over to a senator sitting next to her and whispered, "You see that woman over there with her hand on the Torah, becoming President of the United States?" The senator nodded. "Yes, I do." Her mother smiled with pride and said, "Her brother is a doctor." Traditional capitalism. You have 2 cows. You sell one and buy a bull, your herd multiplies, and the economy grows. You sell them and retire on the income. Socialism. The government takes one and gives it to your neighbor. Communism. You have 2 cows. The state takes both and gives you some milk. Fascism. You have 2 cows. The state takes both and sells you some milk. Nazism. You have 2 cows. The government takes both and shoots you. Bureaucratism. You have 2 cows. The state takes both, shoots one, milks the other, and then throws the milk away. Venture capitalism. You have 2 cows. You sell 3 of them to your publicly listed company, using letters of credit opened by your brother-in-law at the bank, and then execute a debt equity swap with an associated general offer so that you get all 4 cows back, with a tax exemption for 5 cows. The milk rights of the 6 cows are transferred via an intermediary to a Cayman Islands company secretly owned by the majority shareholder, who sells the rights to all 7 cows back to your listed company. The annual report says the company owns 8 cows, with an option on 1 more. Once upon a time, there was a thief and a politician who were friends. One day, they walked into a chocolate shop. While they were browsing, the thief quietly pocketed 3 chocolate bars. As they left, the thief proudly said, "I'm the best thief ever. I stole 3 chocolates and no one saw me. You can't top that." The politician, smirking, replied, "Want to see something better? Let's go back to the shop and I'll show you real stealing." So they returned to the store, and the politician said to the shopkeeper, "Hey, want to see some magic?" The shopkeeper, intrigued, agreed. "Sure." The politician asked, "Give me one chocolate bar." He ate it. Then he asked for a second and devoured it. He asked for a third and finished that one too. The shopkeeper, confused, asked, "But where's the magic?" The politician grinned and said, "Check my friend's pocket and you'll find it." A senator was visiting a primary school, and he asked the students if anyone could provide an example of a tragedy. One little boy stood up and said, "If my best friend who lives next door was playing in the street and a car came by and hit him, that would be a tragedy." "No," the senator replied, "that would be an accident." A girl raised her hand and said, "If a school bus carrying 50 children drove off a cliff, killing everyone inside, that would be a tragedy." "I'm afraid not," explained the senator. "That would be what we call a great loss." The room fell silent. No one else dared speak. "Well, isn't there anyone who can give me an example of a tragedy?" the senator asked. Finally, little Johnny in the back raised his hand. In a timid voice, he said, "If an airplane carrying a senator was blown up by a bomb, that would be a tragedy." The senator smiled. "Marvelous! And can you tell me why that would be a tragedy?" Johnny replied, "Because it wouldn't be an accident, and it certainly wouldn't be a great loss." One day, a man ran into his wife's first husband after a bit of tension between them. The first husband, with a bit of sarcasm, asked, "So, how does my used woman feel?" The second husband, without hesitation, smirked and replied, "Well, after the first 2 inches, she was practically brand new." In a Chinese prison, prisoners are discussing their sentences. "Hey, Zheng, what are you in for?" Zheng replies, "I strangled my wife's lover to death." "Got 15 years. How about you, Wei?" Wei answers, "I got 10 years for robbery and stabbing." "What about you, Wang?" Wang says, "I got 5 years for attempted rape." "What about you, Liu?" Liu responds, 25 years for being lazy." The other prisoners are shocked. "What? How?" Liu sighs and explains, "Well, my neighbor and I were playing Go. After a few shots of wine, we started joking about Jinping and the government. After he left, I thought I should go to the government and report him. But it was late, and I was tired, so I decided to wait until morning. My neighbor, on the other hand, wasn't as lazy." A large sinkhole opens up in a remote town, causing numerous injuries, and the small hospital struggles to keep up with the influx of patients. The mayor gathers the city council to find a solution. The smartest councilor suggests, "We should park an ambulance next to the hole to get people to the hospital faster." Everyone agrees, but with only 2 ambulances available and one needed in the town center, it's not ideal. A few days later, the mayor calls another meeting. The second smartest councilor proposes, "We should close the road between the hole and the hospital so the ambulance can make faster trips." Again, everyone nods in agreement. Unfortunately, this just creates more traffic and accidents on the smaller roads. Finally, in desperation, the mayor gathers the council for a third time. The third smartest councilor suggests, "We tear down the hospital and rebuild it next to the hole." The mayor, frustrated, slams his fist on the table and yells, "You idiots! Do you have any idea how much it would cost to move the hospital? There's an obvious, simple solution. We fill in the hole and then dig a new one right next to the hospital." The atmosphere at NASA was electric as the team celebrated their groundbreaking scientific achievement. Dr. Lowenstein, the head scientist, asked everyone to quiet down as he received a congratulatory call from the President of the United States. He picked up the red phone and spoke with a broad grin. "Mr. President," Dr. Lowenstein said, "after 12 years of hard research and billions of dollars spent, we've finally found intelligent life on Mars." He paused for a moment, listening intently, but gradually his smile faded into a frown. "But that's impossible. We can't do that," he said before replying, "Yes, Mr. President," and hanging up. He turned to the gathered scientists, looking concerned. "I have some bad news," he said. "The president said that now that we've found intelligent life on Mars, he wants us to try to find it in Congress." A government employee, bored and rummaging through his old filing cabinet, stumbled upon an antique brass lamp he'd never seen before. "This would look great on my mantel," he thought, and took it home. As he was polishing the lamp, a genie suddenly appeared. "Noble sir," the genie boomed, "you have 3 wishes, anything you desire." "All right," said the employee, thinking it over. "For my first wish, I'd like an ice-cold Coke right now." Instantly, a Coke appeared, and he drank it eagerly. Refreshed, he declared his second wish. "I wish to be on an island surrounded by beautiful women who find me irresistible." In a flash, he was whisked away to an island full of stunning women, all eyeing him with interest. For his final wish, he thought carefully and said, "I wish I'd never have to work again." In an instant, he was back at his desk in his government office, staring at a mountain of paperwork. One day in class, Mr. Johnson pulled Johnny aside after a test and said, "Johnny, I have a feeling you've been cheating on your tests." Johnny was taken aback and asked, "Prove it." Mr. Johnson replied, "Well, I was reviewing your test, and the first question was, who was our first president?" "Mary, the girl sitting next to you, wrote George Washington. And so did you." Johnny, with wide, innocent eyes, responded, "But everyone knows George Washington was the first president." Mr. Johnson raised an eyebrow. "Hold on. The next question asked, who freed the slaves? Mary wrote Abraham Lincoln, and so did you." "Well, I read the history book last night and remembered that," Johnny explained. Mr. Johnson smiled slyly. "All right, but the next question was, who was president during the Louisiana Purchase? Mary wrote, I don't know, and you wrote, me neither." An important politician had been seen spending a lot of time with a famous film actress for a couple of months. Eventually, he decided to marry her. However, being cautious, he hired a private detective to look into her past and see if she had any history of affairs with other men. A few days later, the politician received the detective's report. It read, "Sir, the lady has a spotless reputation. Her past is impeccable. Her family and friends come from a very respectable background, and no one has anything negative to say about her character. However, according to my sources, for the past few months, she's been frequently seen flirting with a politician of dubious reputation." An American, a Scot, and a Canadian were involved in a terrible car accident. They were all rushed to the same emergency room, but tragically, all 3 died before they could be treated. Just as the American was about to have the toe tag put on him, he suddenly stirred and opened his eyes. The doctors and nurses, astonished, asked him what had happened. "Well," said the American, "I remember the crash, and then there was this beautiful light, and then the Scot, the Canadian, and I found ourselves standing at the gates of heaven. St. Peter approached us and said that we were too young to die. He told us that for a $50 donation we could return to Earth. So naturally I pulled out my wallet and gave him the $50. And the next thing I knew, I was back here." "That's incredible," said one of the doctors. "But what happened to the other 2? The American shrugged and replied, "Last I saw, the Scot was haggling over the price, and the Canadian was waiting for the government to pay for him." A politician, 3 doctors, and 3 engineers decided to climb Mount Everest. They made their way up the grueling climb, stopping frequently to rest and help each other. Halfway up, the rope started to break. The doctors suggested they hold on and wait for help, but no one believed help would arrive in time. The engineers, using their quick thinking and knowledge of physics, said, "One of us has to jump or else we'll all die." Nobody wanted to jump. Everyone clung tightly to the rope. Then the politician let out a deep sigh. "You all are valuable resources for society," he said. "Doctors can save lives, engineers can build great things. But what am I? A useless politician. What do? I just give speeches and make promises." With a heartfelt sigh, he looked at the others. Touched by his words, the doctors and engineers began to applaud him. The son of a Saudi mogul goes to study in Europe. One night, the phone rings at the house of his parents. "Dad. How's life going, son?" "Son. It's going well, Dad." "Dad. You don't sound happy. Is something wrong?" "Son. No, Dad. Everything's fine. Berlin is wonderful. The people are nice, and I really like it here." "Dad. Son, tell me the truth. I know something's bothering you." "Son. Well, to be honest, Dad, I feel a little ashamed driving my pure gold Ferrari 599 GTB to college when my teachers and many of my fellow students travel by train." "Dad. My dear son, why didn't you say so earlier? I'll send you more funds right away. Go buy yourself a train and stop embarrassing us." A Harley biker is riding past Taronga Park Zoo in Sydney when he sees a little girl leaning into the lion's cage. Suddenly, the lion grabs her by the cuff of her jacket and tries to pull her inside. Her parents scream in panic. The biker jumps off his Harley, runs to the cage, and punches the lion square on the nose. The lion, whimpering from the pain, retreats, releasing the girl. The biker pulls her to safety, and her parents thank him profusely. A reporter who had witnessed the entire scene approaches the biker. "Sir, that was the most gallant and brave thing I've ever seen," the reporter says. The biker shrugs. "It was nothing, really. The lion was behind bars. I just saw a kid in danger and acted instinctively." The reporter replies, "Well, I'll make sure the world knows about this. I'm a journalist, and tomorrow's paper will feature your story on the front page." Before leaving, the reporter asks, "By the way, what do you do for a living?" "Any political affiliations?" The biker responds, "I'm a soldier, just back from Afghanistan. Not too interested in politics, but I lean more right-wing." The reporter nods and leaves. The next morning, the biker buys the paper, eager to see the story. On the front page, he reads, "Right-wing deserter runs away from the army, assaults African immigrant, and steals his lunch." In class, the teacher asked, "Can anyone tell me the difference between reality and an illusion?" Little Johnny, known for his mischief, quickly raised his hand and said, "Sir, the fact that you're teaching us, that's reality. And the fact that we're actually learning something, well, that's the illusion." One day, the teacher said to the class, "Anyone who thinks they're a fool, stand up." The room stayed silent. No one stood up for a while. Then suddenly, little Johnny slowly rose to his feet. The teacher, surprised, asked, "Johnny, do you really think you're a fool?" Little Johnny shook his head and replied, "No, miss, but I didn't want you to be the only one standing." One day, a girl was chatting with her friend and said, "There was this one aunt who used to really annoy me." Her friend asked, "Oh, how did she annoy you?" The girl sighed and replied, "Well, every time someone got married, she'd look at me and say, 'You're next.' It was so irritating." Curious, her friend asked, "So how did you get her to stop?" With a mischievous grin, the girl replied, "Simple. Now, whenever someone passes away, I look at her and say, 'You're next.'" A woman fell into a coma, and her husband, thinking she had passed away, prepared for her funeral. On the way to the burial, the funeral procession accidentally bumped into a streetlight pole. Miraculously, the woman regained consciousness. A year later, she passed away again. And this time, as the funeral procession moved forward, everyone was quietly reciting prayers. But the husband, with a worried look on his face, kept muttering under his breath, "Watch out for the pole! Watch out for the pole!" A man's wife passed away, leaving him with 3 children. Later, he decided to marry a widow who also had 3 kids of her own. After their marriage, they had 3 more children together. One day, the man got a frantic call from his wife. "Honey, come home quickly." Worried, he asked, "What's going on?" With a panicked voice, she said, "First, my kids started fighting with your kids. Then, your kids fought back with mine. And now, yours and mine kids are teaming up to fight our kids."